The weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angels' voices, oh, night divine, oh, night when Christ was born, oh, night divine, oh, night divine.
So what I want to do is I want to share some statistics with you guys this morning, and then a couple of scriptures. Because each of us needs to come to grips with what we feel and what we think and what we're going to do based upon the information that we have. While we were gone, we were in Chicago and Baltimore, D.C., and New York. And every major city that we were in, there were protests because of shootings of unarmed black men. There were protests all through those cities. Then when I came, actually I was looking at the news and found out they were protesting out here too for a young man who had also, who was with Down syndrome. He had been choked by the police, and there was another shooting also in Victorville. And so I have been sensitized even up until this moment, because I know that if the church is not at the forefront of the leadership and reform, there's a big chance that people will still remain hopeless. They would spend energy demonstrating, but at the end of the day, nothing will change. And I believe that only God can change a broken system. I believe only God can change a broken system. Psalms 82, 3 and 4, and says, "Vindicate the weak and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and destitute. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them out of the hand of the wicked." The interesting thing is my wife and I were watching a documentary by, I forgot his name just that quickly. Henry Gates Jr. He's a professor at Harvard. And we watched a series of his documentaries that talk about being African-American in America, and also being African-American in Latin America. And we began to see systematically how Western culture, especially our forefathers in this country, have influenced the world in their perceptions of people of color. They have literally influenced the world of their perceptions of people of color. I did not know, and I consider myself a history buff, I did not know that Haiti is a country that African slaves fought for, and the French didn't have the ability to take it back from them. And what the Western world did is they practiced embargoes against them so that they could not sell their crops or their products to anybody. And they bankrupted that country because they didn't want the word to get out that these slaves had overpowered their masters, because they knew that it would have a rippling effect throughout the Americas. And so they practice embargoes, and in order for them to get the embargoes lifted, Haiti had to pay $4 billion. $4 billion. We're talking about the late 19th century, the early 20th century. $4 billion, which is the equivalent of $2 to $3 trillion today. They had to pay that in order for European countries to raise the embargoes so that they could trade and sell their product. And so Haiti was bankrupted by the by Europeans and this Western culture. And they don't talk about the uprising in Haiti and how these slaves took back their freedom and established a democracy and had things going on until they said, no, we ain't gonna let you do it. They don't even teach that. And so for the last month, I have literally been being educated with some of the things that have been happening in here. Now, with the presence of the United States, I want to share some things with you so that you can understand why I have been sensitized. From 1980 to 2008, the number of people incarcerated in America quadrupled from 500,000 to 2.3 million people from 1980 to 2008. African Americans constitute nearly 1 million of the 2.3 million people incarcerated. African Americans are incarcerated at nearly 6 times the rate of whites. Together, African Americans and Hispanics comprise 58% of all prisons. This was in 2008. It's bigger now. Even though African Americans and Hispanics make up approximately 1/4, 25% of the population. According to Unlock America, if African Americans and Hispanics were incarcerated at the same rates of whites today, prisons and jail populations would decline by approximately 50%. 1 in 3 black males born today can expect to spend time in prison during their lifetime. 1 in 3. African Americans represent 26% of the juvenile arrests, 44% of the youth who are detained, 46% of the youth who are judicially waived to criminal court, and 58% of the youth admitted to state prisons, even though African American youth only represent 4% of the total population. This is from the Center of Juvenile and Criminal Justice. About 14 million whites and 2.6 million African Americans report using illicit drugs. But 5 times as many whites are using drugs as African Americans, yet African Americans are sent to prison for drug offenses at 10 times the rate of whites. So for every 1 white person that goes to jail, 10 of us will go. For every 1 white person that goes. African Americans, we know, represent 12% of the total population, and they also represent 12% of the total population for drug users. But they are 38% of those arrested for drug offenses and 59% of those in state prison for drug offenses. African Americans serve virtually as much time in prison for a drug offense, 58.7 months, as whites do for a violent offense, 61.7 months. That's what the Sentencing Project, those are their statistics. African Americans represent 12% of monthly drug users, but comprise 32% of persons arrested for drug possession. African Americans are the ones, and Latinos, are the ones who bear the weight of mandatory minimum sentencing disparities for crack and powder cocaine possessions. Blacks constitute more than 80% of the people sentenced under federal crack cocaine laws and serve substantially more time in prison for drug offenses than whites, despite the fact that more than 2/3 of crack cocaine users in the U.S. are white or Hispanic. 35% of black children grades 7 to 12 have been suspended, expelled at some point in their school careers, compared to 20% of Hispanics and 15% of whites. I'm going to show you guys some real stuff now. If that wasn't real already. They have found in research that jail reduces the work time of young people by more, within a decade, by more than 25 to 30% when compared with arrests with youth who haven't been arrested. In other words, when our folk get out of jail and they tell you that they can't find work, they really can't find work because people don't want to hire them. Jails and prisons are recognized settings that society's infectious diseases are highly concentrated. People are getting stuff in jails and prisons. Even though they know prisons are not rehabilitating behavior, they still continue this pattern of incarceration. The Huffington Post quotes the Sentencing Project saying that, hold on. There are more men in prison than there were slaves in 1850. There are more men in prison than there were slaves in 1850. This is the Huffington Post. Again, 1 in 3 men will go to jail in their lifetime, African American, 1 in 6 Hispanic males, and 1 in 17 whites. Now, how does that percentage equate? 1 in 17 is 6%. That means that the average white male has a 94% chance that he will never go to jail. A 94%. But an African American male has a 33% chance that they will go to jail. 33% chance. Now, the Huffington Post also says that racial minorities are more likely than white Americans to be arrested, and the report claims that once arrested, they are more likely to be convicted, and once convicted, they are more likely to face stiff sentences. And this is our criminal justice system. Our criminal justice system. Now, I normally don't pull out the race card. Most of y'all know me. I don't pull out the race card. And one of the reasons why I don't pull out the race card is because I use a working definition of racism as opposed to a literal definition of racism. Now, a working definition of racism, you and I, when we think of racism, we think of blatant behavior from a particular individual just because of our race. We think of it like that. I think it was my niece, if I can tell the story. She was working, and the girl wanted to get seated before time, didn't have all of her party. And she said, no, you can't do it. You got to wait till all your party gets here. They have wanted a table for 9, and they had about 3 or 4 people there. She said, no, you got to wait till the rest of your party gets here. And so she said, she's racist. She don't want them. What she say about black people? She don't want to serve black people. And I thought that was funny because she lived with a black man. You know? And we cool. But from her point of view, not hers, the girl who called her racist, there is a contemporary definition, and people throw out the race card for any number of reasons. And it doesn't mean that it is a literal definition for racism. It's based upon how you feel somebody is treating you at the moment. So I had to go back and read what Merriam-Webster says is racism. Because I know most of the time, I don't think it's racism. I think it's economic. But what Merriam-Webster says blew my mind. Because a lot of the stuff that I was not attributing to racism was in fact racism. Let me show you this. Merriam-Webster says that racism is poor treatment or violence against people because of their race, or the belief that some races are inferior to others. Now, when I took my trip to Washington and was in the White House and the Capitol, one thing that I learned is that this is a Commonwealth, and because it's a Commonwealth, it means that the government is supposed to protect the interests of the average citizen. The government is. And so when the government finds out that there is a particular group of people that for whatever reason are not able, they don't have the adequate resources available, and they don't have, as Martin Luther King would say, equity, access, and inclusion. The federal government is supposed to step up and institute things that level the playing field. That's what affirmative action was all about. Affirmative action didn't happen because people just wanted to help. Affirmative action happened because people began to protest and they began to sue, and they showed them that it was against the Constitution for you to know that these things are happening and you're not doing anything. Do you guys know we just lost affirmative action? And we had some silly black folk who said, you don't need that anyway, just work hard. Or just, not just black folk, but people of color, period. But the reality is when you look at these statistics, you see that there is policy that works against us. When 1 in 3, we got 3 black boys right here. We got 4. That means that one of them, in fact, bring them boys up here. Come on, I want you guys to see him for a second. Come on up here. Come on up. You ain't got to be shy. Come on up.
It's game to you.
Come on, stand right up here. Stand right up here. Oh. Give him a hand. Look how cute they look. No, but really, that really breaks my heart, because when you look at these statistics, it means that one of them is going to have a run-in with the law. And not only are they going to have a run-in with the law, they're going to be sentenced 10 times worse. This is what we're looking at. And we need to dramatize this, because when you look at these statistics, and if we don't do anything about it, it means that they're going to suffer the consequences. Go ahead, take your seat. I want to show you guys something, so you see how serious it is. Every black person that has ever been sweated by the police, raise your hand. Go put your hands down. Sweated means that according to the police, they were just doing their duty. And they decided that we needed to look at some folk for whatever reason. Profile. As a matter of fact, Parks, who used to be chief of police, he came out and interviewed. He said, because we talk about police profiling our folks, he said, police are paid to profile. They're paid to profile. And the reason they're paid to profile is because they know, for the most part, whenever crimes happen, they're not going to be around. So they're paid to profile what individuals look like, because it means that there will be a higher probability if we can identify what they will look like, then we can maybe stop them in advance. But the reality is they're not stopping in advance. They are just putting our people in jail. I remember, and Sal was with me, I don't know if Kim was with me, we were about 14 years old. We were skateboarding. We were skateboarding. I'm talking about with Vans and shorts and t-shirts. And Sal would tell you, it was about 14 of us. And the police stopped us right in front of his house. Told us all to line. Am I telling the truth, Sal? Now this was 30 years ago. But it was so traumatic in my mind. As a skateboarder at 13 years, I'm 43 years old right now. They stopped us, put us on the fence, told us to keep our hands up and shut up and look straight. While they decided to run each of us, we were 13 years old, and began to harass us because we didn't have ID. Who has ID at 13? This was back in the 80s. I had to have a conversation with my son because he was sweating. You were 14, 13, walking down the street, and they decided to sweat him. It is wrong that our people are having run-ins with the law. It is wrong because they're initiating it. It is wrong. It is wrong that the system, and I tell people all the time, and the government knows it, you cannot expect the same system that is prosecuting you to expend the same resource to defend you. You can't expect it to happen. And you have to know that because we don't have the money to pay private attorneys, they give us a public offender. And because a public offender has spent so much time in law school, has got bills to pay, they are taking on as many cases as they can. So they don't have time to focus on your case. Matter of fact, I was talking to a preacher the other day. He said, you're better off learning the law yourself and defending yourself than depending on a public offender. Matter of fact, we've got some people in here who took the law into their hands and utilized it, and now they're out today. Amen. But we've got to see the pattern that is being perpetuated with people of color. And we've got to wake up. Because it's not getting better. You know, I began, and this is my theory, I'm going to do some research, and I'm talking to some folks with Dignity Empowered now who are doing, they presented to the UN in Geneva, Switzerland, and Mark Anthony's a good guy. We're developing this relationship. But one of the things that I started talking about when I came back to Washington is that we don't vote. But those million guys who've been to prison, policy, law says once you have a felony, you can't vote. You can't vote. So now you take those million guys and you put 60,000 here in LA, put some in San Francisco, you put them in Chicago, you put them in New York, you put them in Dallas, you put them in Houston, you put them all over the country, which is where they are. And because they know, see, these guys are not going to come out and tell you, I'm not voting because I have a felony. What they're going to end up saying is, I don't want to vote. I don't believe in the system anyways. And they influence other people to not vote. And because we're not voting, they are passing policy. That's why, if I can say it, preachers spent 16 and a half years on a felony. And the felony was a $10 piece of crack cocaine. Now you tell me how this nation would allow an atrocity like that for somebody to spend 16 and a half years for a $10 piece of cocaine. Especially since we know black folks ain't getting the cocaine in the first place. It had to be brought here.
Yeah. Come on.
And then they have policy that works against them. So not only are they offended the first time by getting excessive sentences, they get released. And the policy says that now when you go to apply for a job, you have to answer the question, have you been convicted of a crime in the last 7 years? Now, one thing that I didn't realize that I know now because I've been working with reentry is if he's been locked up for 16 and a half years, 7 years has passed. So when he comes out to write on his application, have you been convicted of a crime? The answer is, but it don't work that way. The way it works is that as long as you are in the system, whether incarcerated or on probation or parole, it is an active conviction. So now 16 and a half years turns into 24 and a half years. And the truth is when people look at applications, unless they have been sensitized, they will look at somebody and say, man, they got a felony. Even though of having a felony is not a measure of character. Because guess what? They're arresting a lot of us while we're young, and we do a lot of dumb stuff when we are kids. The problem is that there is a higher concentration of the criminal justice system in our communities than other places. That's why for every one white person that goes to jail, there are 10 blacks. And with the government knowing that and not doing something, Merriam-Webster defines racism as poor treatment against the people because of their race, because they know it and are not doing anything. It is what they call institutional racism. Because now the institution itself perpetuates a racial slant against a specific group of people. I started looking up, and I'm going to say this, and I'll be done in a second, but I want for you guys to know the numbers. Dante Parker, Victorville, killed, unarmed. Ezell Ford, Los Angeles, killed. John Crawford, Beaver Creek, Ohio, killed. Michael Brown, of course, in Ferguson, killed. Eric Garner. The tragedy of Eric Garner, and people, you guys, you know, you have your own beliefs about who you feel is guilty and who you feel is not. But I don't believe it's about guilt or innocence. This is what I believe. I believe that police should not be using excessive force unless people are a threat. If they are not a threat, they shouldn't be utilizing excessive force. If they are not a threat, they shouldn't be using excessive force. So when it comes to Eric Garner, he was selling cigarettes and not paying cigarette tax, but he got tired of being harassed by them and said, look, man, y'all been messing with me, yada, 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 yada. And I understand, yes, he's supposed to pay taxes. Yes, he is supposed to pay taxes. But if you saw the video, that cop was not supposed to jump on his back and put him in a headlock because he wasn't a threat. He wasn't a threat to them, and he wasn't a threat to the general public. But what happened was that the police said, we're going to show you who is in control. And that's what the criminal justice system does in our communities. They show us who's in control. From them taking me and Sal and 14 other guys who were on skateboards and putting them up on the fence and saying, wait a minute and show us your IDs and we're going to check y'all out. To Eric Garner being choked out and illegal use of force. Yes. Tamir Rice, 12-year-old in Cleveland, Ohio, had an air rifle, a BB gun. And I don't care what they say. The size of that gun, they knew that boy didn't bring it in that store because somebody would have identified him. As a matter of fact, the people knew that he took from the shelf. LeVar Jones, South Carolina State Trooper, State trooper was leaving at first. He turns around and comes and says, let me see your license. LeVar reaches into his truck to get his license. The state trooper, scared to death, shoots him 2 times while he's reaching to get his license because he told him to get his license.
Amen.
Goes around his car. LeVar is confused, obviously. He just been shot. Says, why have you shot me? He's reaching. He shoots him 2 more times, and 1 time he's got his hands up. And he says, why did you shoot me, man? You told me to get my license. Now, he lived. He lived. But it tells you of the mentality of their training that allows them to engage, because you really don't have black on black shooting like you have white on black shooting. And one of the things I was talking to a buddy the other day, and I'll say this and I'll finish up, but they're bringing in people who have been taught to think a certain way. I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of times we say, why is it always got to be a black and white issue? Why is it always got to be a black and white issue? Because slavery was never resolved. It was never resolved. So even when we had the Emancipation Proclamation, we were freed. There were no laws to protect us. We were just free. So even then, it seemed like Abe Lincoln did a great thing, but he did what he needed to do to save the Union. So we were free, but still couldn't get jobs. We still couldn't own property. As a matter of fact, that's what 12 years a slave is all about. Because the federal government didn't come in and back up what this Emancipation Proclamation was all about. So the Africans, freed slaves who migrated to the north, they would criminalize them, because if they said that they had run away, they could come back and get them and they could make them a slave again. So they had people who they sent to the north that took Africans that were free and brought them back to the south. That's why after the Emancipation Proclamation, Texas still had slaves. And they wasn't about to give them up. But slavery has never been resolved. That's why we needed civil rights. That's why we needed a Voters' Right Act. We needed the bill. So now, guess what they're doing? They are taking back what they didn't want to give in the first place. And we don't realize what they are doing. 1 in 3 of our young men will be incarcerated in their lifetime. How can we even rest knowing that each of us as parents is going to have a conversation with their kids, their young boys, about the police? Because it's not a matter of if it's going to happen. It's a matter of when it's going to happen. And will they be prepared mentally to handle the abuse of these folks?